Hi, everybody. Hope you're having a great Christmas Eve. Thanks for joining us on this big holiday weekend. We've had a lot of newsmakers throughout this year. Of course, LeBron James from Akron made international headlines, but some of the local newsmakers had a lot to say and did an awful lot that affects us all. Tonight, we sit down and hear what some of them had to say.
We are very fortunate here in Northeast Ohio to live among many jewels. And to my mind, there is no jewel that shines more brightly than CVNP, Cuyahoga Valley National Park. It's 33,000 acres, nestled along the banks of the Cuyahoga River. It is one of 58 national parks in the country and the only national park we have here in Ohio. Well, CVNP has a new superintendent. And we invited Stan Austin to join us. He's barely 3 months into his job, to tell us a little bit about himself and about what he sees for the future of our national park. Stan, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me today.
It's a pleasure to meet you. How are you finding Ohio so far?
Well, cold lately.
It is. Tell us what brought you to Cuyahoga Valley National Park. What attracted you to this particular park?
Good question. That's a question I get on a regular basis, and I think it has to go back to my background a little bit. But initially, I was the superintendent at Glen Canyon National Recreation Area for the last 3 years, and I had some yearning to get back east, to get back to those experiences that I had in my previous positions in the National Park Service.
Tell us about yourself. Describe who you are, where you come from, and your background. I know that from the research I read, you came from an urban park.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was your first experience with the park system, and now you're back at an urban park. So tell us who you are.
It's kind of like life going in full circle. I started out in Gateway National Recreation Area in Sandy Hook, New Jersey. I grew up in New Jersey. I was born and raised in Newark, New Jersey as a boy, and then we moved out to the burbs of Jersey. But what those initial foundation with my parents, getting me out to national parks as a child, I think really gave me that yearning to go west and see a wilderness national park. But it's interesting that my parents were ahead of their time. You know, we talk about a deficit of kids now, not really getting out into the field and not experiencing parks because they're doing their iPods and their laptops, like my own children. And my parents were like, every summer we went to a national park. And these are parents in the 60s and 70s, early 70s, where they would load up the car once in the summer and go somewhere. And it was a world of experiences for me as a kid. And the other thing, we lived in an urban area, and my parents had a very nice yard, and I spent a lot of time with my mother saying, go out and do some volunteer work, or go out into the yard and do something. And I just experienced science in my science laboratory in my backyard, where made me pursue a biological career. My initial was to go to med school, to be a doctor.
Because you went to Rutgers.
I went to Rutgers, and I was a biology major, and I met a professor in an environmental science class. And he said to me, you know, there are not that many African Americans at Rutgers University that have a passion for science, but your personality, you can give back. And so we went on a trip to Louisiana and helped urban kids in these pockets of oil refineries and the whole epidemiology of the oil refineries and smoke, and also lead abatement and all those type of things. And I worked for a few weeks down there, and I got a passion to really help urban youth understand how this pollution affects them.
And that led you to go from medical school or the potential of being a doctor into the national park system?
Well, I wanted to give back. I felt like my parents gave me those opportunities that other kids just never had. So long story short, I finished Rutgers. I got an internship at the National Park in Sandy Hook, and I worked there for about 6 years as a park ranger. And I figured I would pursue my biology degree, and I went to EPA in Washington. But still along the same lines, I did environmental health and water quality issues in EPA for almost 17 years. But my yearning was to get back to the Park Service. And I kept applying west of the Mississippi, we call it. Lots of times, if you start in an urban park in the east, it's very hard to go to Yellowstone and Yosemite. Mm-hmm. So an opportunity broke for me where I got a job offer at Rocky Mountain National Park in Estes Park, Colorado. And that was my first assignment as deputy superintendent. I worked my way up at EPA, so I just transferred out there.
Mm-hmm. So now you are back at another urban park.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about Cuyahoga Valley National Park. What attracted you to it, and how is it different from maybe some of the other national parks that you have been exposed to?
Well, clearly very different. I worked at Rocky Mountain National Park and Glen Canyon National Recreation Area, which is a park with 1.3 million acres, and it was a park plane that would take staff and myself up to meetings because otherwise it would be a 7-hour drive. And that's how people can't imagine how vast these special places are. And then I had an opportunity to go to Yosemite National Park as a deputy superintendent prior to coming here. And what's really interesting is I applied for this position here, and I also was offered a position at Yosemite. And people would ask, well, what's Cuyahoga? Where is it? And I made the decision to come here because the director said, Stan, with your partnerships and collaborative experiences and your passion for youth and education, Cuyahoga is the place for you. So I made the decision to come here because of all the innovative things. I mean, Yosemite, Yellowstone, Acadia, these parks have it figured out. They've been doing the same thing. They work. But Cuyahoga is cutting edge. You can come here, it's a laboratory. John DeBow did amazing things here as a superintendent for 22 years. So I want to take it to the next level.
What will that next level be?
First, I want to hear from the communities, and I want to hear from all the passion of the people who are the visitors. As you know, Cuyahoga Valley is in number 8 in the nation as far as visits. So we get about 2.5 million visits, and we only have 33,000 acres there. So it's important to understand what the community wants, but also make the community realize that this is a national park, and we've got to get it on the map. So the next time I go out to Yosemite or to a meeting in Maine, and I say, I'm the superintendent of Cuyahoga Valley National Park, people will say, well, they won't say, is that the place where the Cuyahoga River burned, or where is that? They would say Yellowstone, Yosemite, Cuyahoga Valley National Park in the same line. And I think that's going to be one of the things I would like to change. People will know this place for the special place it really is, because it's beautiful.
Oh, it is, absolutely.
And it's unknown.
Well, yeah. In fact, it's unknown for a lot of the people who live just within its environs.
And that's very true. And I think that's where we have to reach out to the youth. There are youth, urban youth in Cleveland and Akron, clearly we have to give them some exposure. But there are youth in Chagrin Falls and Hudson. So it's not about lower income youth. There are higher income youth that don't understand that this park is here. And when they get there, their eyes open. It's amazing to see the school groups coming into our Environmental Ed Center.
Oh, and that's a fabulous place, absolutely. And to bring those kids in and give them the kind of exposure, like you said, in a week-long program, does wonders for them in terms of their exposure to the park.
And that's unique to the Park Service. There are a few environmental ed centers, but no center like the one we have here at Cuyahoga. And that's because we have a partnership with the Cuyahoga Valley National Park Association and the park. We work together to make that work. And it's a really great partnership, and we're doing great things. I met with the director last week, and he said, we're a motto that we're going to, innovation that we're going to use across the country. So what people don't realize about Cuyahoga Valley National Park, we have the Scenic Railroad, we have one of the best friends groups and partnerships, and then we also have the Conservancy.
The Countryside Conservancy with the farms.
Yes.
You mentioned that you have following in the footsteps of John DeBow. Mm-hmm. So you are the 4th superintendent of the park since its short history. Mm-hmm. What special qualities, Stan, do you bring to this park?
I think collaboration and a willingness to listen. I think that, and also experiences from some major national parks that people recognize and know well. In my first 2 weeks here, I met a couple coming down from Acadia, Maine. And lots of times when I worked at Rocky Mountain National Park, you would have these what we would call RV. They sell their homes, they get an RV, and that's their life. That $100,000 RV is their home. And so they said to me, we saw the sign, National Park, and we got off the highway. And it's very different from Acadia, Shenandoah, where we stopped. Where is the visitor center? Where are these places? And what's your lodging? There's their RV hookups. And I said, and here's being the new superintendent, I said, well, we have some of these things, but I really didn't know, so it was kind of funny. But those are the things that you wonder about being a national park we have to work on to get us on the map.
In the 3 months that you've been here, what has surprised you pleasantly about the Cuyahoga Valley National Park?
What surprised me overwhelmingly is the passion that the people have for this park. And believe me, I've worked in big national parks where people love their park. This park, I get emails and calls every time. After this interview, I will get emails and calls about people who love the park and want to help and want to do something. Do you know we had 140,000 volunteer hours last year? That was in the top in this whole entire region and in the top 5 in the country as far as national parks, because we have so many people who volunteer at Cuyahoga Valley National Park. And that passion, it's overwhelming. I said, if these people love this park so much and they want to help make it a success, and I think that's not something that happens to all superintendents.
How can you, as the superintendent, build on that passion and bring those people to do even more? I mean, the number of volunteer hours is absolutely amazing. Do you have room to build it up even more?
Certainly. I think that we don't turn anyone away, because I think someone that wants to come work on a trail, someone that wants to volunteer in a visitor center or help on the scenic railroad. I mean, the Polar Express is a success. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And those are 80% of those folks are volunteers. They have the passion to go out there in the cold winter nights to see that visitor enjoy themselves, those children.
Have you been on the Polar Express?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What'd you think?
It's amazing. It made you go back to your boyhood, where you feel like, the North Pole and Santa Claus really exist.
Do you have a general philosophy about the value of a national park system and the national park in all of our lives?
Well, I think they're very special places, and I think our forefathers really were thinking, Theodore Roosevelt and these folks that really John Muir, and I think when you think about Yellowstone or Yosemite and starting that trend of national parks, it makes you feel like this country is very amazing. I've lived in other countries for work, and people from all over the world have heard of our national park system. There are people that have come to Cuyahoga. 80% of our visitors are local, but that 20% is growing. We're starting to get international visitors because of the national park system in this country. I mean, to preserve those wilderness and natural resources that are amazing.
Stan, I want to talk a little bit more about the collaborative partnerships that this park has been known for. Mm-hmm. You've got, as we mentioned, the Countryside Conservancy. You've got the Friends Group, which is the Cuyahoga Valley National Park Association, which I think is changing its name to
Conservancy.
Conservancy, mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then you also have, of course, the Scenic Railroad. So let's talk a little bit about each of those three, if you don't mind.
Okay, I'll start with the Conservancy at Cuyahoga Valley National Park, and that's going to be their new name effective the end of January. And the reason why they're changing to the name Conservancy is because of all these partnerships that we have and all these relationships. And just being the Cuyahoga Valley National Park Association didn't really encompass all those wonderful things that we're doing in our partnerships. They have the Environmental Ed Center. They have the Trails Forever program. So all these things are going to be umbrella. And also the Scenic Railroad and the Countryside Conservancy are all part of this overall umbrella that we hope to really incorporate all these partnerships. And this is unique in the National Park Service. The director for the National Park Service said to me last week, I was in Washington, and he said, Stan, you all are a model. There's not many places that have the Countryside Conservancy where they're putting sustainable farming back into the parks. And really, 100 years from now, you'll come back and that same farm will be there, sustainable, looking for the future. The Scenic Railroad, their numbers are up 50%. It's amazing to go on that train and take a ride back in time.
Well, and they also have a really good, I think, interpretive history that you can listen to while you're taking the train through the park. Mm-hmm. How do those relationships work? How does the Park Service work with all of these different groups?
Well, we call them friends groups of the park. They're independent. However, they're partners. And this is a unique place at Cuyahoga Valley. All parks don't have friends groups or associations, but Yosemite has a very large one, for an example. But they're partners, and what happens is that when people ask me, what can I do to help you in the national park? I says, there are two things. You could become a member of the Cuyahoga Valley National Park Association, now the Conservancy, or you can volunteer, because those are two things that your time will be very beneficial to the national park. You know, partnerships can make or break a park in many ways, but this one is so unique and special. I think that, you know, you're only going to see wonderful things happen in the future.
Let's talk a little bit about the farms, because that's kind of a new program. I mean, there were times when the park came in initially and threw people off some of those farms, but now they're bringing it all back. You have how many farms now working, do you know? I
think it's 30.
Okay. Yeah. All right, and how does somebody...
I think it's 13, but we have 30 possible.
30 planned? How does somebody get to farm in the national park?
Well, that, believe it or not, after 3 months, I'm still trying to understand the whole concept. And superintendents are calling me from around the country saying, because it's so unique to the service, and the way John DeBow was able to make that happen, it was they have to apply, and actually in the near future we're going to have 2 new lease options where people can actually apply from all over the country, and they have criteria, and they put in an application, and they get to live on a working farm, and they bring whatever crops they want to bring, and there's some conditions. But it's very unique. I have had superintendents from out west saying, how do we do the same thing with ranches? That we have these abandoned old mining ranches or old different, and they're going to decay. How do we do something similar to what you all are doing at Cuyahoga Valley National Park? It's a really cutting edge, and I'm still getting my teeth around that one. But I went out actually last week and met with Darwin, and it's just an amazing concept.
Yeah. Darwin Kelsey.
Yeah, but what's interesting is that you know, we have to understand and be mindful of the history. I mean, there's some sensitivity there. I mean, you know, and I wasn't here at the time, and I think that, you know, you move people off their farms, and they might be still some relatives in the community, and they say, well, you moved me off my farm, and now you're farming again. So there's some sensitivity, and I think that's very important that we are sensitive to what has happened there.
You mentioned one aspect of meeting the couple who came from Maine, which brings to a point that I've read that you are interested in starting in the park, and that would be to provide a little bit more of an opportunity for overnight stays, for overnight visits, and for campgrounds. Speak to us a little bit more about that and what that means in terms of visitors.
And clearly that's a sensitive issue too, because, you know, people are concerned. They don't want a Yellowstone here. They don't want traffic jams and massive. But I'm looking at, you know, long-term planning, so do it right. You know, when people come here to a national park, they expect to have some type of facilities. Well, we want the same level of facilities that these other parks like Acadia, Shenandoah have. You know, and it might even just be signage. You know, you drive off the highways here, you don't have clear signage. Visitor center, people come to me and they say, well, where's the visitor center? So having a central one-stop visitor center where people can go learn about the train, the hiking trails, the biking trails, and get all that information in one great central location. Also lodging, you know, whether we work with the surrounding communities, but, you know, gateway communities are very successful. The parks are economic drivers. You know, historically, during this recession, we talked to the other superintendents, there are hotbeds of economic stability where national parks exist, and we see the same thing happening here.
Wow. What about some of the other unique aspects of Cuyahoga Valley National Park would be the attractions that are literally located right in the park. You've got Brandywine Golf Course, you've got Blossom Music Center, Port House Theater.
Brandywine Inn.
Brandywine. How do all of those, the Inn at Brandywine Falls, absolutely. How do all of those figure into your future plans?
Well, I think they're partners, and I think, and what's the good thing, as I said earlier, they all love the park, and they all want to work with the park. Whether it's skiing outside the park, those are private, but at the same time, people come here because they know it's in the park. And I think these facilities work closely with us to be one general Cuyahoga Valley National Park.
And you can obviously continue that kind of flourishing
relationships, and many parks have that.
One of your passions is youth, as you talked about your childhood and your family bringing you into the national parks and what that meant for you. How important is it to you to start more programs to get youth into the parks?
Well, I think the Conservancy at Cuyahoga Valley National Park, or for the name was rolling out, but I think us working together with this partnership for environmental education is critical. But at the same time, all youth, and I think we have to really focus on reaching them early and continuing it. We just can't have fourth graders come on a trip. We have to have something in sixth grade or eighth grade or college or high school, because it's important to have it throughout your youth to understand those connections to the resource.
Well, and once you make those connections, obviously it becomes a captive audience, does it not?
It really does.
There is, if I'm not mistaken, a pretty comprehensive trail use plan, management plan, that I think the park is undergoing a study now. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, there are comments out for a trail plan, and that trail plan will encompass whether it's water trails on the river, biking trails, hiking trails, horse trails, all types of trails, and how they're utilized, and what we are looking for the community to give us back feedback to what would they like to see at Cuyahoga Valley National Park. And clearly, there's no prescriptive decision right now. We want to hear from the community. Then we'll work with the leaders in the National Park Service. We work with other superintendents, because what we do here impacts all parks. So if we make a decision here, then it will impact other parks. So it's very complicated, but we're waiting for comments. And so far, we're getting some really good comments, and we're hoping that early spring we'll be able to come out with a plan.
More trails all over the park, and will the plan literally tell you where the trails are going to go and how they're going to be designed?
Well, it may not be more. It may be improvements on existing. It may be changes on existing. Or there's also an option for no changes. People may say, we like the way things are.
Over the past couple of years, there have been a couple of, I don't want to say problems, but issues that have developed in the park with coyotes and with deer. Speak to us about how you juggle the issue of wildlife and what, this is their home, but you've got people in there. So how do we dovetail that?
Well, that's interesting. We are doing a deer management plan, too, that's really, we're working through Washington to get that developed, similar to our trail management plan. But I think it's a very complicated issue, and I dealt with that issue with the elk management plan
out west.
Out west. It's very similar. And I think that, we have to understand that these are special places not only for people, but for wildlife. So we have to balance it. And we're working with metro parks to make sure that we can manage our deer populations, and I think it's been somewhat effective. I mean, right now we did our deer count, and I believe the numbers are not as high as they have been historically.
And you just brought up a point about a collaboration that is really unique, and that would be the collaboration between the national park and then the parks down here in Summit County, and then the parks in Cleveland, the metro parks in Cleveland. How does that all work together? Because there are times when people don't know that they've left one park and gone into another. And
that's very important. That's a very good point, because even sometimes when I'm driving, because it's such a hodgepodge of private, public, and metro and Summit parks that I don't even know sometimes. I'm still learning. But I think we have really good leaders in both in the Summit and in Cleveland Metro Parks. I think it's important that we work together collaboratively, and we are, especially on some of our biking issues, trails that connect, maintenance issues, and also deer populations. We have discussions. I've met with Keith and Bryant Zinnerman.
And those discussions obviously go forward?
Yeah, I think we have to be partners because we're connected.
Stan, you've only been here, like I said, barely 3 months, but what do you see for the future? What are your hopes for the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, and what do you see for its future?
Well, I see the future to make it, leave it better than I found it. I'm certainly not going to be here for 22 years, otherwise I'll be here with a cane. So John Debo was here for 22 years and made some amazing moved forward, but I want to take it to the next level, having great signage, having people know the park outside of Ohio, too, and understand it, and people in Ohio. There are people who have written me in Ohio saying, I didn't know until I saw your interview that was a national park. I thought it was a Metro Cleveland Park. So I think just a large education piece and understand what they have. I think people in Ohio have to realize they have a jewel, just like the people in Wyoming, understand. In Colorado, they love Rocky Mountain National Park, and they want the world to know.
And you're going to help make the world know about Cuyahoga Valley.
Yeah.
Tell us one last thing. What have you've been to the park probably. Do you have a favorite spot yet in the park that you've been able to pick out?
Well, clearly there's some, each time I go out, and I haven't covered all 33,000 acres for sure. I mean, just the ride on River Road is amazing in the fall, but the ledges are a very special place. If you get out there on a early morning and you see the clouds coming up, there are some really amazing places, and I think the train ride just took my breath away when I came here in June for a visit. That was my first experience actually getting down into the valley, and that's what sold me on the job. I said, this place, I could really get it on the map, and at the same time, it's one of the most beautiful places that I've been to. And I say that, I keep going to better and better. Rocky Mountain, I thought that was the best place. Yosemite, I thought was heaven. And now I just think this is just spectacular. But I'm a guy from the East, and I think I'm coming back home.
Coming back home to the East and to an urban park.
All right.
Stan Austin, thank you so much for being with us.
It's been a pleasure.
Best of luck on your new position.
And happy holidays to you.
Well, thank you. Happy holidays to you.
Thanks.